in big cities, right? Right. Even in Jakarta, for example, you could live right next to a high-rise apartment and still live far worse than those people in the apartments, right? And there's this large wealth disparity, even if you have worked your entire life out. And this is different from rural areas where communal living is more prioritized, where wealth wealth equality is more or less not is more or less prominent than the big cities, right? And this brings me to my first argument, which is that this is basically the benefits of living in rural city, right? There's more because of this communal living. There's more working together with your neighbors to strengthen the community and relationship, right? And there's silaturahmi, for example, with neighbors are more frequent, where people socialize and share food, especially on public holidays. And this is important because when you are in a like a worse place, uh, there's still this strong social connection that you can rely on these people for help. This is different from people in urban cities where hell I don't even know what my neighbors' name are and what they do, and I doubt they will help me if I need help, right? If I'm in a worse situation, right? Before moving on further, yes, POI.
Suburban living is not something that is cottagecore. Everything that you think of suburban living in the status quo right now is different entirely from the past. So, what if the suburban living is entirely not within your capability?
The the rural and suburban living. We agree that suburban living still depends on like necessities of for food from other cities or even other villages, right? Especially in case of emergencies where these rural areas are not able to sustain themselves. But that still doesn't take away from the slow living of these rural places in the first place. And those kind of slow living is this still exists, and we will still ensure this slow living exists by giving those incentives that we just talked about, right? And anyway, as I've stated before, these strong social connections makes more stronger social bonds, and people have a social aid towards one another who is struggling, something that is very rare to see in the city, right? And furthermore, I've mentioned before about the process of instant process. Well, in rural areas, you have to make your own food, and you see the process of food going to your plate, right? And this process makes you more appreciate how food gets on your table, and it essentially learn to appreciate how the little things in life works, right? And that makes you have a more calmer mindset as opposed to living in the city. And this we are proud to propose. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the speech. Just a gentle reminder for everybody to don't forget to time yourself because I will stop writing at 7 minutes and 15 seconds. But yeah, without any further ado, to open the opposition case, please welcome our here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
And am I visible?
Yes to both.
Okay. I dedicate my speech to my teammates because I'm a high schooler here, I think. My teammate is so good, and also I dedicate my speech to Kak Givari. Um, yeah, starting my for PI parents, just unmute yourself. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels. Raya is from Curup, Rejang Lebong, that from suburban area. He doesn't want people to move in into his area because simply Raya doesn't want it will be crowded, for example, not having the same essence what his childhood seen in the past, for example. I don't know why that it is urgent for those people to move in because even my friends telling me that from those metropolitan area, that my area is lacking of many things, but I still find enjoyment on that. I don't know why then people will going to find peace on that, proud to oppose. But to rebuttal for OG Dan. One, when they're telling you panels, how it's give you more opportunities to get jobs, right? I think no, simply because I think we can simply think that it is the most cash. It is like really not ideal for you because how then is very different from what you used to be. Notice how then they're never telling you what kind of jobs that exist on suburban area, for example, like farmer, retail sales, and to whatnot. I think there doesn't enough like analysis to how then people will eventually get accepted, for example, or how then people will eventually enjoy enjoy the jobs, for example. Because here's the thing, I think that the moment where people want to move in the suburban area, they already have past jobs, for example. I don't know why then they're not going to like comparing their old jobs, the new one, for example, and to whatnot. Because here's the thing, I think in most of the case, people are going to just like comparing things at the end of the day, and I don't know why it is going to be ideal for OG then if they're trying to claiming that. But secondly, then panels, when they're telling you how then exactly people from suburban area just tend to strengthen the bond silaturahmi and whatnot, I think no, simply because how then people in suburban area just doesn't want easily to open to everyone. The reason why Raya has strong bond to his neighbor, because southern people there already have history each other, for example, right? Since even like before I'm born into this war, and my mom already has such as like his story with her neighbor, right? Or even how then people on suburban area just going to know you eventually if we are talking like people from metropolitan city moving to suburban area. I think people just will know you that you are from suburban, those metropolitan area. Hence, you're having like different lifestyle. For example, I don't know why then. I think suburban area people want to accept that since the very first place, because how then there doesn't. I think I think the interest is looking like these panels. I think people from suburban area exactly they're the one their place to get ruined by people, because suddenly they're seeing how then metropolitan people just going to like tend to like ruin environment, for example, that don't exist that maybe like minimal exist on suburban area with that I'll explain later then. I think our goals are very simple on these debate panels. We want people just living things that they already live. We don't want them to change their way of life suddenly because of this like narrative. We're going to like let them living things that already live, right? But yeah, I think two framings on this debate then. I think one, I think when it comes to rural area like panels, I think people tend to see it as something that peaceful, you can run away from problem and to whatnot, because how it get glorified at the very first place on this motion. But to the point when I'm considering this, since I'm from Churup anyway, when the moment you do this narrative, it will be the same later on. The fact that right now the suburban area for each country is having different situation, for example, I think this narrative tend to generalize that is good, very good, and I think it's not. The moment you step in towards this, I think people that really vulnerable on this debate, which is people that want peace and whatnot, will questioning. Instead of having peace life, what's lacking of everything here? This is not what we want panels. Because I think in so far, people from metropolitan city having those mindset that they need something quick and easy, like how in Jakarta it has TJ and to whatnot, right? The reason why people in suburban and rural area think this is just normal, just like me, that living this life, because how then we used to it in the very first place. I think no, I think no, government cannot say adaptation exists, because how then people on a status quo that the moment that they can access easy things is the very first place, they always want more and more, and it's not happening for government. The reason why they want to move into rural area and suburban area, because how then glorification tend to tell you that it is good thing, to the good thing later on, very bad for the whole government bench. But secondly then panels, I think this is why problem occurs on the whole government bench. The moment that this narrative are very glorified at the very first place, most of the case people will move in, but the moment it happens, and what framing I told you before, is where I think at the end people start pushing those suburban area and rural area into something bad, pushing their metropolitan mindset into those area just for the sake that they can have the same taste from the metropolitan one. So it's like uses of technology that affecting environment, for example, or just see then how mobility going to use cars and whatnot, and the amount of that many people will ruin the environment at the end, because Southern is going to be glorified at the end on this debate, right? We don't want these panels are just already happening on those areas, but that the reason why government cannot touch you things such as like making electric area and to whatnot, like yeah, saving the nature is it's not likely to be too possible, because suddenly the government doesn't have the intention to do so, because I think so far I think government intention for suburban area is focusing for those staple like farm and to whatnot, right? Or even how then actually it is what original people from suburban area interest anyway, because holiday is still a thing anyway. I don't know why there is like urgent for you to moving into those area if holiday is still a thing on this debate. But yeah, I think coming to my first argument and panels, I think I'm going to prove you why suburban living in the end isn't the ideal by people in the very first place. No, I think I think suburban living is not the same as in the past. Peaceful, categorical live and easy to run away. Everyone knows and love each other. I think I think uh I think several points here. I think most of them is desperate in chasing technology. Idea is sufficient cost because of things, and also in accessible of further tech because you are used to it in areas like city. But secondly then, you wake up in the morning, the view you come is not peaceful, because it now more like an area like mine area, for example, urban fields. This is true since most of rural or suburban area which rich sumber daya alam concentrated in Indonesia, right? But see then, also like the living condition is not peaceful as it is. Most of them are still isn't that differs to open to new people, especially if there's someone from the city, right? But then I think it's principally not ideal in the very first place since it's not category living. Like how then this narrative going to like glorify to you anyway, right? But lastly then, I think this is also prominent on this debate. I think see how that even like on suburban area tend to have banjir, for example, or other bencana alam, such as like I don't know, like earthquakes and etc. I don't know why then this is not going to be worsened by how then this narrative going to exist at the very first place. Because how then I think the manifesting that really prominent on opposition, how then at the end people just going to move into those rural area and suburban area and to whatnot. And I'm still questioning how then on opposite on government it is not going to be like worsen the situation and to whatnot because it is already been explained by government at the end, right? I think the weighing is very simple panels. I think on scale of impacts, I think government are I think opposition already told you whether it is not likely for you to like moving into suburban area and to whatnot, and whether it is not ideal as the glorification is looking at. I think we already explained furthermore how then actually we want these people living as it is opposed.
All right, thank you for the speech. Now to continue, please welcome DPM. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, PR preference is just unmute. I'm probably going to answer in my 5th minute, but you can just say it once. Don't say it multiple times because it is distracting, and please don't badger. Okay. I'm gonna start my speech. Oh, I'm setting up my timer. Okay, gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So I would like to start off my speech by first providing some rebuttals to what O has stated. So firstly, O has stated that people from rural areas won't accept those who migrate to their villages or whatever because they came from cities and they have different mindsets, right? And I think that this is untrue. People from rural areas are known to be accepting and kind because that is the culture that they live in. To live in a rural area, you kind of have to depend on social aid. You have to depend on your neighbors, etc., because it's impossible to, provide everything for yourself when you're living in a rural area. And because this is the culture they live in, this is the culture that they grew up in, I think that it is already in their mindset to be accepting of others because you won't know when you're going to need their help someday, right? And that's why they're also encouraged to help each other because they know that help will come back to them someday. And sure, it might be true that they might have their assumptions and stereotypes against people who come from big cities, but it doesn't change the fact that the culture that they live in already emphasizes collectiveness, right? They don't immediately turn away people who think differently, and over time they will grow to accept when those city dwellers also acclimate to their surroundings, and also day by day grow to adopt this kind of mindset as well. And we know that change doesn't happen overnight, but those people will, of course, eventually start to adopt this kind of mindset as well. And there are, because of that, there will be less differences between them and less of a reason for them to not accept these, the people who migrate there, right? But even if it is true that people from rural areas are less likely to accept them, I think that this program doesn't aim to just move people out. We have already stated in our mechanism that it will also aim to give support and help those who live in rural areas. And when I think this kind of like development is something that is very needed, especially when we know that there are many villages in Indonesia, for example, that are dying. And I think like this kind of support in the form of development, but also in by like having people move there, there will be more people for the community to depend on. When you have a bigger community to depend on, you have like a bigger safety net, right? There will be more people who are willing to help you, and who you can guarantee will try to help you in some way when you're in need of help. And I think that this is a long-term benefit
Uh-oh.
later. This is a long-term benefit that they will also see eventually. But okay, second rebuttal. They say that people from big cities will push their metropolitan mindset and ask for more and more, right? And I think that yes, it's true that this is a metropolitan mindset, and it has various like negative impacts on the mind, because it feels like you're unsatiable, and you always want to buy more and more to feel satisfied with your life. But that's exactly what we are aiming to change. We want these people to not think that way anymore by encouraging them to view rural and suburban living in a more positive way, right? And sure, again, these people won't change their mind overnight, but day by day, as they're getting more used to the slow life of living in these rural areas, they will make it a habit to appreciate these little things, to appreciate the things that they do own, because we know that things in rural areas are much less accessible as it is in metropolitan cities, right? It's harder to do overconsumption and everything. And I think that because of that, they will appreciate more the things that they do have, and that is a mindset that we will change at the end of the day, right? Moving on, I will go to my extensions, which is that this program will also aim to benefit those who are already living in these rural areas. Now, from what we have stated in our mechanism, this program that glorifies rural and suburban living will also give support to the people who already reside in these places and will help heighten their quality of life. And this program will also focus on them, since they are, of course, the most important actors in this debate. Now, I wanted to highlight the issues that these people face in the status quo. We know there are many villages in Indonesia, for example, that are dying because the people don't make enough money, and more people, especially those who are young and of working age, who are migrating out from these villages to work and live in bigger cities like Jakarta, because the city life basically guarantees a better pay and a higher quality of life. And I think that this is a trend that we have seen continue happening in recent years, right? And if we don't take immediate action, I think there are a few issues that will arise. Firstly, of course, traditions will start to die because there are less and less people to upkeep them, and it's harder for one generation to pass down that tradition to another. And of course, we have stated that people can also have a harder time to support for themselves, right? But there's also harms towards these people who eventually choose to move out to metropolitan cities. I think that even though they romanticize this big city life, they will find that it is very hard to keep that life, and to actually support and survive themselves. And this is how their program will fix that. But for that, yes, POI.
Suburban area tend to have different living conditions and disparities. How is it under your side you're going to solve all of these mindset of disparities when in the end of the day it doesn't work out?
Okay, I've already told you that in our mechanism we have stated that there will be more financial support towards these rural areas. We know that it's harder for them to make a living for themselves, and that's what this program is aiming to change. By giving financial support and like bettering the development there. I think that it's very possible to make living easier for them. But of course, with more people migrating there, there will also be a bigger community that can help support each other and help uplift each other, right? When one of them needs help. And I think that big community is very important in ensuring that like the community doesn't die out in the end, right? Because with this kind of like a program, people more people living there means that it ensures that they will help each other, and the traditions that are already in place won't eventually die out, because obviously we are also going to encourage communal living where they can help each other and live together in more social harmony. And that is why we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the speech. Now to continue, please welcome the LO. Here.
Hi, am I audible and both visible?
Yes to both.
Thank you. For POI preferences, please unmute yourself and state POI, and please don't spam POI, be mindful. Thank you very much. And before I start my speech, I really want to thank everyone. This debate and competition has been very well because, ignore that. Yeah, because it's very fun. And as a high schooler, this is kind of our first time in BP, apalagi Baby Eng. And thank you so much for every arrangers. This is such a fun debate, and we are very thankful. This is also our first finals in Novice. Thank you very much. And I really much thank you for my teammate for helping me all of this too. Yeah. And I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. I live in Samarinda city, Kaltim, and yes, it's hard to live in because there's many challenges and others because it's just a city. But I do know when I go to villages, it's something that's a suburban area. I feel like it's more worse since it's entirely different of diversity, different living situations, and it's not something that you see out of the movies just because it's a rules different area. It's not something that is cottagecore in the first place. Again, OT has been living in a delusion entirely just because they want to glorify this superior living as something that's better for people to run away so people can be peaceful, so people can be other that. My P1 already told you, suburban living right now is not something entirely as a cottagecore or something that is idealistic in the first place. Because the way you just wake up in the morning, everything is going to be pertambangan, everything is going to be mining, for example, right? Or that's entirely not true because the nature there is actually changes. Because this is exactly the likelihood of Indonesia, for example, or other suburban livings. Because suburban or rural area usually tends to have a bridge SDA, and it comes to a more pertambangan, and I think there is benefit from the government, for example, right? This is not something that you entirely go to if you want to just heal yourself and you want to live yourself by the end of the day. If you want to go healing, if you want to go something that's true out to the nature, for example, then why not take a break from the city and just go away and just have a vacation, for example? Even by the end of the day, you're going to say like it's going to be more expensive and yada yada. No, suburban living is not, so rather than suburban living that I have to cater towards contracts, for example, and just changes, and you have to adapt to all of the living situations that are entirely different from how you think. Idealistically, that's not possible at all. Since you're living in a city, you're capable towards that tradition, and you push yourself into a new tradition in the end of the day. Even if they accept, I'll explain to you why it's still not ideal in the end of the day. If you want to go and heal yourself, then why not take a day off from the city, go to a pergunungan or something, go to the mountains, for example, and just just literally go and enjoy the nature, for example. You don't have to live in the city just because for you to be mindfully, like be in peace with later, be in peace with later with nature, for example, right? This is idealistically bad because also the thing that they glorify about higher and softer quality of life, for example, from the city to go to the superior area, that's inherently untrue because this is not cottagecore type shit. It's also suburban area that's entirely different. I live in Samarinda city. I know suburban areas a lot. Perdesaan, for example, villages, for example, and the way that I go to there, yes, they're nice, but the fact that I wake up sometimes to pertambangan, I wake up sometimes to minefield, and that is not the thing that you glorify by us because suburban city is not something like that. Therefore, the issues right now is not how you can gather happiness because you just exclusively like move to areas such as peaceful area, but it's also not by just be living in suburban because the issues right now is how you as a city person are able to adapt and survive in suburban area where the living condition is not cottagecore, it's not idealistic for you in the first place. But let's engage entirely on OG. When they are saying that they want to change how rural area and suburban area to be better with this narrative, how will this work out eventually? Because the paradox of this being brought up, if only the people from your suburban area and rural area need it that way. And it's urgent. And if it's urgent, as if there's any or not urgent, why would this be in the metropolitan people anyway, right? And B, even if this is true, they're considering that this is actually defined for those areas to be intoxicated by pollution, for example, right? The way you actually live live in a city person, you adapt to a new tradition to the perdesaan, for example. When you don't know how to throw your trash, you have to throw it somewhere else. You have to ask your neighbor for advice like that. You have to adapt to the living conditions where you are in a disparity of life. Yeah, exactly. If you want to say, for example, like they tend to be more open, it's okay. They're going to be more diversity. In the end of the day, no, because in rural area, usually in villages, they're not in diversity. Then by the end of the day, even it's hard to connect with them, especially because it's not within your language, for example, within your own capability, for example. And even if they're nice or even if they accept you, you can't deny the fact that the disparity already happens of lifestyle, for example. And therefore to say you will cater to more an uncomfortable living condition with all of your neighbors, for example, because it's not easy to connect with other people, for example, right? Also, financial support. Even though they want to say like, why not give a financial support program? Your opportunity is more lesser there for getting jobs, for getting municipal or even getting money. The gov doesn't even talk looking towards that, and it's not an alternative. I think OG is like just living an entire delusion by then. Yeah, but yeah, let's still come to my clashes and argument extension by then. One, question extent. Why in the living alternative of city is fundamentally better at the end of the day? Because one, the opportunities for you to actually getting jobs for jobs in like rural area and I think like that, just for you to survive is entirely bad, entirely worse and entirely harder because of the correct towards anything like that. Again, this is not cottagecore. Suburban living is entirely
You
different. Later, also the capability of yourself, the fact that you live something that is lack of diversity, something that is unable to for you to actually adapt towards that, the capability is entirely hard to live in the first place. And also, yeah, so people living are entirely more easy to get natural disasters. For example, if you're a city person moving to a rural area, how are you going to survive the longsor? How are you survive the banjir, for example, the floodings? How are you going to survive in any of that? Because entirely that's tend to happen in rural area. In the end of the day, your living condition is not ideal. Your living condition is not something that you adapt and you go through in the end of the day, because the people there are able to adapt towards any setting like that. But you as a metropolitan person, your person, yeah, before 6 PR.
Why people that come from the urban area are the people that is really abusive towards this rural area?
Probably because the living situations. Because imagine that you actually in city, like throwing out your trash, still have trash place, for example, or even you have a technology that you adapt to. Just because you want to move out to rural area, you're going to have that habit, and exactly you don't know how to put that habit in anywhere because rural area and suburban area doesn't have that capabilities. So in the end of the day, meaningful or not, you're going to be exactly indirectly abusive towards that, and the city people will be more uncomfortable towards that. And also, yeah, let's weigh this on the capability weighing by then. The thing is, under government, under OG side, or even the government bench entirely, it's going to be harder because you're a city person. Just to run away from your issues and to run away from all of the living area, you entirely just go and change to a suburban area. I don't think that's capable because suburban needs exactly like contracts, for example, changing like that, for example, or anything living in situation that is differently from you to be example. The contract is harder to get the living. You have to harder to even move it to move to those suburban area in the first place because it's already like people already know each other by then. How are you getting houses by now, or contracts, anything like that? And also the living situation is much more harder. Yeah, I think under our side, living in cities is better. Question second is under worst case, living pro-ship and programs, for example, in cities is going to be harder. This is true. Even a city has hardship, so further it's still worse because you have to change things to communal livings to both. For example, the disparities is not you. Also, if you tired of the city, if you try for everything, for example, then rather than moving and dealing with all of the contracts, all of the adaptive communal living, just go on a vacation. Just go to somewhere in the superior living so you can have your peaceful or anything like that. Or even you can just visit people there rather than living entirely, changing your contract or things like that. I don't think you will even survive because me as a city person, even in rural area, Samarinda right now, going to pedesaan as a KKN, I don't think like I wouldn't. The diversity is too different for me, and that's why OG. All right.
Thank you for the speech. Now to continue, and to open the closing bench, please welcome member of GOF. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Before I start my speech, I just want to say, all of the things that I say do not mean to trigger anything and offend anyone. Do not mean to offend anyone because like I might talking about sensitive content. And since Jaslyn gave shout out, thank you to my teammates Kadifa and for carrying me to this level of Novice Grand Final and everyone in this room. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, One, the top half of this debate discussing about some unimportant and unurgent issue. When OG decide to take argument on escapism, which I agree with OO is quite arbitrarily and not exclusive, and OO just playing on their worst case scenario, but when the people that come from urban area to this more rural area, they're going to be totally that abusive. Our contribution in this debate as CG is that we want to prove by the active glorification of people that live in this rural area, showing how dire their previous conditions are. Therefore, should be incentivized government or other big actors to care to create a development in this rural area, which what these people want. 2 points of framing on CG in this debate. Firstly, what are forms of our mechanization? OG posted about this, but I'm going to explain that we want to do to highlight all the miserable conditions for people that live in this rural area. For example, non-existence of school, university, etc., do advocation to them directly, and therefore promoting their previous conditions and their detrimental conditions to the social media, etc. Right? Means that exactly because there's immense amount of exposure creating by this content, it incentivizes people to actually care because now they see the grievances and the vulnerability of these people that live in this rural area. But secondly, we will highlight to the people and the big actor, there's actually many potential that you could access in this rural area, right? Things like resources, many human quality resources to actually do blue collar workers to your own company and etc. Means that they would likely to tap in, but I'm going to explain that later on in my extension. But secondly, who is this actor that obligated to help these people that live in a rural area, right? Two people. One, there are the governments that actually have the moral obligation to care for every single kinds of people, no matter that they uplift or not, whether or not they're developed or still developing, exactly because this government moral obligation to do so. But secondly, it is people that directly do social movement because this is the because this is the form of them actually care and see the disadvantages that these people feel, and they would likely to advocate this to the people and raise a lot of awareness for people that existing right now on the ground. But what is my extension in this debate, right? Just one extension. How glorification highlight the advocation that people live in a rural area. I'm actually surprised that OG never talked about what is the previous and the original condition of people that live in this rural area. How dire is their condition exactly? Three things. Firstly, there are the people that has a limited amount of basic necessity. There's actually minimal amount of elementary school that exists in this rural area, minimal amount of healthcare or like infrastructure, things like bridges and etc. Right? Means that the quality of human life that people live in this rural area is actually lower comparatively, significantly lower comparatively to people that live in the urban area when there can be the graduate of university and rising up to be COO and whatnot. But secondly, there's a limited amount of work field, exactly because almost everyone in the village or in this rural area has little to no differences in terms of epistemic access because there's minimal amount of school that is happening. Means that the amount of job that exists is not diverse to begin with, right? The reason why this is dangerous is exactly because everyone have the exact basic skill. There's not a lot of work field that they could access because the things that they could do is the things that other people would do and not exclusive to their own identity, to own their own ability in order to grant them with jobs and things like that, right? But thirdly, their resources got ripped away by people from the government, and the problem with the people that exist in this rural area is firstly, they cannot do minimal advocation because people from the government felt like they have to focus on advocating more centralized government in order for them to be able to compete in international field rather than creating a development for these people. But secondly, their voices is got unheard, right? Because these voices do not because these people do not have the epistemic access to do advocate themselves because they do not understand things like complex procedural law, for example, that enables them for illegal mining and things like that, right? What is the impact of this framing? Firstly, we show to you that these people that live in this rural area would likely to get out in order to get job. The problem with this is two things. Firstly, exactly because they do not have the epistemic access to get the bachelor degree and etc., means that they in a city going to tap into more abhorrent job such as being PSK and whatnot, and this has actually happened a lot back in IKN in Kalimantan, right? Before it's actually been built. But secondly, they cannot compete with people that exist in this urban and rural area because, as I told you, these people from rural areas far more uplift, means that they're going to subscribe to more abhorrent and and detrimental job to begin with, right? This proves to you that there's actually innate incentive for rural area to get at least a basic advocation and access for education and things like that will necessitate them and equip them with ability later on in the future. But secondly, if there are people that actually thriving in this rural area, they will not likely to continue to come back because they felt like they already feel pleasant and comfortable in city anyway, right? Means that you're going to continue the generational disadvantage of people if we do not glorify how dire the life of people that live in this rural area. But before 6, any POI? 3, 2, 1. But thirdly, there's ongoing stigmatization in which people keep always telling that the Kalimantan region is not always that developed. Therefore, you do not come there because the job comparative is not that prestigious and whatnot, right? But why glorification will protect this kind of people? One, exactly because it triggers a lot of big actors to actually help because there's the potential of people to got into this area, right? This is what likely to be happen because the comparative in this area is hard. Comparatively, if they all say that people would likely to be stay on urban, people that live in urban area, for example, they got stressed because it is so competitive. On our side, exactly because in urban area would likely to be more lean, they will invest into this rural area, right? The things like company always need hard blue collar worker in order for them to generate more profit by expanding their company. They would likely to cater people good and not be abusive, and this directly responds to all because one, they do not want these people to get riot, right? People right now in the current status quo has a lot of stigma to know actually the things that's happening in this urban and rural area. If it is true that this company or like people of urban area are that abusive to begin with, they do not want the good name to be name dropped, for example, and having a bad image. Hence why there's no more profit that going on to them because people do not trust them to begin with. Hence why even if the comparative is that these people will likely to not get a proper job, at least comparatively, they would likely to get job that will generate them revenue comparatively to be unemployed or got more terrible jobs on site opposition, right? But secondly, exactly it provides people with work field and basic education. For all those reasons, proud to stand in grand final.
All right, thank you for your speech. Now to continue, please welcome member of opposition. Here.
Hello, am I audible enough?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. POI reference. POI preference, please just unmute your mic and say POI because I won't be able to look at the chat box. Thank you. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, and wait. Let me look at the motion first for the last time. Yeah. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, just what does the motion read? This house would actively glorify the narrative of rural and suburban living. What does that mean? That means the motion needs a burden of proof in the forms of mechanism, and what everyone in this chamber does not provide any kind of mechanism. But here, this is our biggest contribution. But first, some rebuttal, actually just one rebuttal to our direct opponent. They said that the moving of city livers to rural area will increase the conditions because more people will come in, more infrastructure will be built. Well, actually, this is simply not true. We are going to flip this. More city livers that will move to the rurals will actually make the conditions worse. Why? Because overpopulation in rurals means more people are opening more land, more suburban areas to be built. That means a long-term damage to the rural community, more damage to the environment. That is not good. That is very morally wrong in the long term. Judges. And also, they also talk about the government obligation to build amenities like hospital. It is simply the government obligation to build amenities like hospital, regardless of the population. Even if the population of that rural village is only 1%, it is the government's obligation to build that, no matter if there is city livers moving there or not. Okay, some characterization, and we are going to explain about the core problem of why people are moving to the rural area. But some characterization that people are forgetting here. Rural is simply like your average village living, cottage living, and also the most forgotten part, the suburban. Suburban is like a complex or residential area where every single house only house one family. That is simply not efficient and also not effective. But instead, we are going to glorify apartment, which is a simple and small building that actually is a skyscraper that can hold like hundreds of family. Okay, I'm going to another characterization of why people are moving out of the city. First, it is because the city's inefficient city planning and about car centric society. And why is that? People are living in an inefficient city, living in a city where there are more roads, that means more car to get to a very close walking distances, amenities like stores or even parks. These people have to deal with traffic, more noisy city. And also people
Hi.
no, thank you. People are getting more depressed because they have to live in that kind of environment where you are basically trapped in a city full of car, where everything is hard because the asphalt is trying to boil us alive in the city. That is the main reason why people are moving out of the city. What is our stance here? Our stance here, we believe that it is better morally to build better urban cities. Because car-centric society is like in the USA, where you have cars everywhere. Even if you want to get to the closest pizza store, you have to use cars and have to deal with traffic and get stuck in the traffic for like 5 hours or 30 hours because of the crazy ass traffic. And also, what is our argument here? Our main argument here is to build a better city and blocks up and city apartments block, and every single blocks of this apartment has their own amenities in walking distances, and also some kind of car restriction and more emphasizing in walking, like no, thank you. Like for example, in several European cities, like Portugal, where there are a lot of rectangular apartment blocks where cars are actually restricted, and in every block amenities are built into them, so people don't have to deal with their depressing city life of traffic and all of that and noise. And also, let's compare about suburban and rural, that and our part and our glorification, which is apartments. We are glorification. What? No, okay, what is it?
The villages are already dying in the status quo. Don't you think that more people will ensure that the rural areas has a better chance of preserving since there's a bigger community supporting it?
Yes. No. Actually, if the villages are dying and people are living in a city and moving to a city where city planning is better, it is basically a morally better, a morally net plus for us, because people are actually getting their job and living a more in a city where everything is happier, where city planning is not that bad. Okay, let's get back to my comparison. Like I said before, apartments are far more efficient to not using enough spaces and city blocks. While suburbans, you have to like open land. You have to cut a lot of forest spaces, forest areas, just to build a small suburban area. How and our mechanization in this, every single blocks has to be an amenities in walking distances. Like I said, the bane of city living in America right now, or even any city living metropolitan, are the basically terrible traffics. They have to live in that kind of situation that is simply depressing. Every single parks, every single pizza shops have to be in that specific apartment blocks. This solves several things, several points. This solves noisy urban areas because cars are restricted, and also it promotes healthy living, like more walking, more cycling, and all of that, and also hotter climates from the city because there are less roads, less asphalt, and all of that, and etc. and etc. The very vulnerable people that we are going to save here is basically the environment. By opening more land for suburban living, you are basically destroying these environments, because you are cutting off many forests and cities. This is long term not a very good thing, not a very morally good thing. And also the rural people, we are going to bring in gentrification. If city livers move to rural area, they will expect more things. That means more gentrification will happening, and that is bad for the villages. And also the city people, the very first thing that even our OO forgot to glorify, to save is the city people. So what are they going to do? So what are they going to do? Just live in their terrible cities and wait until they commit suicide because they are depressed because of city living? No, we are actually solving the root problem here. We are telling you about the root problem of and everything, and also we are simply better because we solve the root causes and we also save more actor, which is the OO didn't even care to save the city people. We have also the mechanism, which is what the motions needed. Our motion is also very detailed and also very technical. And also in the effects, long-term people will be happier, healthier, and mentally better because they don't have to live in this terrible condition of city living, and also cheaper rents, because the things that made housing expensive is landlords trying to squeeze money out of the residential area. I think that's all from me. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the speech. Now to close the entire government bench, please welcome Government Whip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. For your preference, please just type on the chat box whenever unmute yourself. And thank you for Jojo for taking us to grand final. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think what the debate forgot I think what everyone forgot about in this debate is that how they are accessing narrative about how then you should go into the city, into big cities, so you can be succeed, right? And it is exactly the core problem that happened in the status quo, because then people from the rural areas that doesn't have sufficient education cannot actually just jump into this are jumping into this narrative, and this narrative are drilled into their brain, and that's why they move into the city, and that's why it costs a lot of population, and also they cannot survive, right? This is exactly the core of problem that happened, and this is why we need to glorify this narrative, right? Okay, I'm gonna respond to every bench. 1, to OG. OG told you about how then on the side of the house they're gonna protect the most vulnerable actor, in which it is in which they said it is the metropolitan people, because then they are suffer from hustling and etc., and they gonna promote this rural area as a way for them to actually get emotional support and etc., right? We think that it is exactly harmful the mechanism coming from OG. Why? 1, because you are romanticizing the living in rural area and suburban area, and you are taking advantage of this rural area and suburban rural or locals to actually take care of your depressed people, right? And it is exactly because you are pushing this romanticization that these people cannot actually survive in rural area anyway, right? And here's the thing: when you are just trying to you are pushing the agenda of romanticization of rural area about how they're gonna take care of you, how you gonna have a community, etc., then it's gonna make you feels like, oh, if I'm going there, then I'm gonna be healed and etc. But the thing is, there are no high likelihood of that's going to happen. 1, because you are coming from a big city. Secondly, because you are depending too much into local, because you are depending on giving so much expectation towards this local, then you're gonna and if those expectation doesn't meet then you will not stay into this rural area for a long time anyway, right? That's why every benefit about development and development that they talk about will not happen anyway. And this is exactly different from our mechanism, because then in Fiji we are glorifying this narrative, because we are telling you about how dire and how this rural area is actually need help anyway, right? Because the thing is, we glorify this narrative with to the target of the government itself, and also people that and also a big corporation, so you can jump into this rural and suburban living. This is exactly why in outside of the house, when you are not romanticizing the rural area and romanticization that you're gonna get healed there, we think that in outside of the house, then these people will just stay for a long time, and that's why the development that we talk about will happen in outside of the house, right? This is exactly why this is why CG wins over OG. But what Auto tells you brings into this debate. 1, they told you, but they don't want their area that the locals will not accept this city people, because they want to get or in short, they want to get the locals want to get their area, right? 1, I think that even if then this city people come into rural area, they won't actually ruin the cultural or like the environment that badly. People from city area are not that abusive like how they glorify to you. One how their culture will not be ruined anyway. The local is really tied to their culture, right, and habit anyway. So because of those strong ties to their own culture, so that's why their culture will not be just crumbled anyway just because these city people move. Secondly, because they are I think that the thing is these people, the environment will not be harmed that much anyway because one there are exposure coming because we glorify there will be much exposure towards this rural area, right? Which is there will be so much I think there will be so much care into this rural area. That's why there will be a lot of check and balances. But also secondly, that these people are not that abusive because then they need to maintain their image. As example, the corporation, they will not just ruin all the environment because they need trust from this local area, right? This is exactly why. This is exactly why that this likely won't happen anyway. But thirdly, the thing is, if you are then supporting this gatekeeping movement coming from rural area, we think that is actually backlashing to the rural area itself. Why? Because they are in dire need of development, right? And this cannot be happen if you are not glorifying this narrative, because then people from the big city will not actually jump into this rural area. Right? This is exactly why on the side of that is going to be worse, and you are not protecting the vulnerable access. But secondly, they told you about how this metropolitan people will not actually cannot adapt into the rural area with a lack of capital. We think that is not true anyway. One, you need to understand the characteristic of the city people is that they are real adaptable because then they live fastly and they are really competitive, right? This is exactly why they already have adaptability in their in their uh, in their in their personality anyway. This is why we think that even if then these people actually may migrate into rural area, we think that they still okay anyway. But here's the thing, what CO brings into the table? CO brings to you about how they're gonna develop the urban city, etc., etc. We don't understand the argumentation because we think that it is unimportant. But the thing is, in their side of the house, they're gonna create more disparity because they're gonna focus on developing the urban area, right? And we think that is unimportant, so that's why you should not count their argumentation because it's not urgent at all. Secondly, they told you about then how it's already a government obligation to build infrastructure in rural area. Exactly because of that you need this narrative to be glorified. Why? Because in the status quo, the problem is in the status quo, the government doesn't care about this rural area development because then there are no glorification and they just think that
Order.
it's what you say. Then they just think that this area is already okay and enough anyway, right? This is exactly why we need this glorification, so we can create an urgency in our our society and giving urgency towards the government about how they need to help this rural area and suburban area, right? This is exactly what happened in our this is exactly the likelihood that will happen in our federal house. That's why we went over CO. But the thing is, in our side of the house, when we actually create a counter narrative, there are some implications. One people that actually locals that actually try to go out into the city will actually come back because then they will not feel embarrassed about their own city or like feel like they have failure, that because then there are counter narratives to the narrative that you should go to the city to be success. But secondly, even if secondly, to people that the big city people will actually still stay for a long time because there are more diverse job opportunity, and that's why see you in the debate.
All right, thank you for Government Whip. Now, to close the entire debate, please welcome Opposition Whip. You're here.
Wait, let me set my timer first. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, for POI preference, just simply mute your mic and say POI. That's why I'll start my debate in 3, 2, 1. Judge a few rebuttal toward the OG side first. They're basically talking about how this kind of communal support will eventually help the people on the city and eventually help people on the rural side. So basically what they are talking about in this motion about the communal support is eventually will happen in our side too, because why? This kind of communal support that my first speaker already told you about the mechanization that we want to broke by making this kind of apartment and this kind of things, and eventually the in their side will have some kind of playing room, playing ground, this kind of things, and the children in our side of the house will play with each other. Their mother know each other too. This kind of things with the communal support will eventually happen because they already know each other. This kind of individualism will unlikely to happen because of our mechanization that eventually happening. And the second, they are talking about this kind of things, this kind of actively glorify will giving people stable job in the rural area and this kind of things. My question is, if everyone become farmer, so who's gonna buy the farmer things? And why do people, and my second question is, why do people move from the rural area to the city at the very first place? Because why? Because there's no job at the rural area. Because people will eventually trying to seek job in the city, and eventually they got depressed, like my first speaker already told you, and they suddenly miss this kind of rural area experience. And hence why this kind of actively glorify will eventually ruin the reason for them to come to the rural area. Because why? Because rural area is no different from the city. If you actively glorify it, because people will eventually move to the rural area because you romanticize the living in the rural area, and eventually it will become no difference between the city. What is the difference between the city and the rural area? And this kind of things will never be answered by your side of the house. And they're talking about a large wealth disparity that happening in our side of the house in the city. But mind you, if people actively glorify it, the rich people will come to the rural area. The wealth disparity will still happen on your side of the house. Rich people from city will buy a large area to build their house. Small local people house will be beside their big house, the Japanese style house that have their own farm, that has their own thingy, that have their own lawn, this kind of big ass thingy that will eventually make a large wealth disparity seen even more, because we know that people in the rural area is not the people that very wealthy or this kind of things. So this kind of wealth disparity will eventually happen at yourself in the house, so it's not exclusive. And you're talking about communal support too. So when more people on community when more people on community can depend on, because the people in our side of the house move to the rural area because you actually glorify it, and you know the actual reason, like my first speaker already told you, because of the depression, because of the noise itself will become the reason for people to move to the rural area is to gain the inner peace itself. So eventually the individualism will still exist in the city in the very first place. Because why? Because when they move to the rural area is to search for inner peace. I don't move to the rural area to socialize with people, but I move to the rural area because I want to find my own inner peace, not because I want to contribute to the society, and this kind of things will eventually happen. So when you ask the POI about rural area are dying, isn't it better for people to live in rural areas so people will have more people on community to depend on? This kind of things already solved in the status quo. The government already make the civil servant like nurse, like teachers, like doctor to move to the rural area. So this kind of things, it doesn't matter anymore. But come to the CG. Why actually they're talking about? They basically telling they want to save more rural area people because they want to show the dire things that rural area people feel. Mind you, how this kind of things will harm the rural area people and eventually harm the city people that move to the suburb and rural area. Why? How this narrative about glorify it? Yes.
What would be the incentive on your side for a corporate CEO, for example, to want to buy a land or a house in some village in like Madiun, for example?
Yeah, it will happen in your side of the house when people actively glorify this kind of things. If people don't actively glorify this kind of things, eventually at the first place, the rural area will still become the rural area with the forest, with the environment in here. So eventually, even if people that are moved, maybe the CEO, this kind of things, at least not all people in the city will move to the rural area because the depression, because the noise in the city that make them eventually move to the rural area. And we already saw it by the mechanism that my first speaker already told you. And come again to the CG. Why how this narrative about actively glorify it will eventually lead to overpopulation itself. So the rural area will be harmful, the environment will be harmful because people make their house, people in the city move and then build their house, this kind of things, and they this kind of things will be bad for the environment because there's no any more forest, because people will eventually make their house in the rural area. And come to the OO basically talk about they glorify living in the city, but they don't give any mechanization toward what actually the root problem that this motion could arise. So don't give point to the OO side judge, because why? OO are too biased. They don't talk about the root problem that my first speaker already told you. So give point to us why people. So they don't talk about why people feel depressed in the city and want to live in the rural and suburb area in the very first place. We as CEO already explained how the root problem in the status quo. We already tried to solve the root problem, and we are the only team that tell you, judge, that the mechanization that really solve the root problem for this kind of city people that are in the motion itself, and even give the answer to the problem that opening opposition couldn't answer, that and that kind of things will still happen in their side of the house. And we solve that one problem, that things that we are when we are coming in the debate. What is our contribution? We give the mechanism that solve the root cause. We save vulnerable actors such as local people, the environment, and the city people, the local rural people, and how our solution answer the even opposition problem proud to raise our case. Thank you.
All right, everybody, thank you for the great debate. Yeah, since this is an online competition, you could cross floors virtually. Thank you as well for making it to, and congratulations as well for making it to grand final. You can you can go wait in the main room while waiting. And judges, let's move. Wait, let me stop